Welcome to our fourth annual Transformation Literacy Conference. My name is Dominic Stucker, one of the managing partners at the Collective Leadership Institute. We are an independent and non-profit organization. We have an office in South Africa, in Cape Town, as well as one in Potsdam in Germany. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, 2025. We've been around for 20 years. And so at the top of this conference, I thought I would just mention that. Thank you. Our team works with incredible partners around the world to help enliven different teams, stakeholder systems, networks for enhanced collaboration, all for this bigger vision of a just, peaceful, and sustainable world in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of what we do at Collective Leadership Institute includes our academy, where we're building competence for collective leadership and work in sustainability and peace. Focuses mostly on individuals and groups. We also work in transformation stewardship, working along whole systems of actors for realizing shared visions. Our thought leadership is focused on providing different publications, different insights, researching and reflecting on the work that we get to do with others and making that available. And finally, movement building, to which this Transformation Literacy Conference belongs. Here, we're trying to build networks and communities that are contributing to a global movement for enhanced collaboration around the world. So today we have two sessions for you. The first is focused on empowering metrics. And the core question that we're considering here is, how can metrics and feedback systems support clarity and also enhance progress towards sustainable development? There are many sub-questions and topics that our speakers will also take up in the course of their presentations and subsequent discussion. The broad goals that we have are indeed to celebrate those practitioners, our speakers who are coming to talk. We want to learn from their cases, from their stories. We'll be applying the collective leadership compass, which I'll talk about momentarily, especially for enhancing patterns of aliveness in transformations of all kinds and at different levels. And finally, we seek to further connect all of us as a collective leadership community for exchange, for inspiration around these topics. And the way we'd like to do that today for this first session on empowering metrics, this of course being the welcome, bit of an introduction, we'll get to hear from speakers and then get into a deeper conversation with our speakers. This has been some feedback from last year that participants would really like more exchange with speakers to go into a bit more depth. So that's precisely what we've done here. And finally, at the end, a chance for all of us to reflect through a couple of questions. What insights are coming up for you? What open questions might you still have? How are you feeling at the end of the session? And just to note, this was the first of two sessions. There will be a 30-minute break between the sessions, during which time you can be in the lobby, you can explore the range of partners that we have supporting this particular event, and you can connect with one another a bit more there as well. So in holding this conference, we feel that some basic norms are important and appropriate so that we can really create a safe space for exchange and learning. Of course, we want to embody respect in all the interactions we have. Also, kindly, your patience with any technical glitches that might occur. We encourage you to express your views, our views, clearly and concisely when you're making a comment in the text chat or later on if you're making a comment with your microphone. And this listening with an attitude of seeking to understand, of inquiring, of coming from a place of being open to one another's ideas and perspectives. And that, of course, is related then also to suspending our judgments and remaining open to others. So thanks very much. I hope we can all embody these norms that we see here on the screen. So let's get a bit more into framing of our topic here. This conference is called Transformation Literacy Conference. So what is transformation literacy? At Collective Leadership Institute, we understand this as an ability to design, to implement, and also to learn from transformative change processes. Transformative change is a complex undertaking, and there are surely moments where there are missteps or mistakes that occur. Learning from those and taking an adaptive approach is important. Furthermore, it's knowledge and capacity of groups of decision makers, of change agents, different institutional actors to steward such transformation. So accompanying those processes in a way with a high level of understanding of what might be needed at given moments to continue to enliven the transformation process at hand. And finally, the capacity to both collectively identify and to enhance patterns of aliveness in ourselves, in our communities, our initiatives, and beyond. We'll be going more into that idea of patterns of aliveness and sensing those at different levels, according to what the speakers will also bring in. Now, I mentioned the collective leadership compass earlier. Here, many of you are familiar with different lenses in this compass. So the compass is designed to look at individuals, to look at teams, to look at whole stakeholder systems and networks. What you see here is the lens called the transformation enablers. So this lens in particular is useful in looking for those patterns of transformation, looking to enhance those processes that seek to bring about really meaningful change. And there are, as in all the other compass lenses, 6 different dimensions that you see on your screen here. This year, we decided to focus on 2 of these dimensions, 2 of these transformation enablers, as entry points for transformative change. Specifically, enlivening narratives, and that's the session we'll be looking at this afternoon, as well as empowering metrics are the 2 that we'll be looking at in more detail. For today, with empowering metrics, what we have in mind here is fundamentally asking questions like, what is success in the work that we're doing together? How do we define that success? What is it that we truly want and truly care about? Can we potentially balance both quantitative and qualitative indicators in the metrics that we choose and push back against the misinformation that is so rampant in the world? Is there potential for shifting away from the control and judgment that's so common of many monitoring and evaluation approaches? How can we shift to measures that are more empowering and build on strengths? And finally, considering processes that are involved in empowering metrics. Not only what kind of data are we gathering, but who is doing the gathering? How often are they gathering? How is that data interpreted? And with whom is it shared and how? These kinds of feedback loops, of course, can be very important in ongoing learning and growth through the metrics that we choose. We'll ultimately want to connect empowering metrics with enlivening narratives as we translate numbers into those narratives or support the storytelling that we do with some of the metrics that we're also measuring. Let's move in here. I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers, and then I want to turn also to the participants to see who is in the room. Alicia Jimenez is coming to us from Costa Rica, where she has kindly gotten up very early to be with us. She is Director of Programs at Earth Charter International, just outside of San Jose. And she's going to be focused on presenting on assessing values for sustainability in education processes in schools. And specifically, this is the Earth Charter and Education for Sustainable Development school seal that she's going to offer as an example of metrics in an educational setting that look both at the operations of a school as well as the curricula. Alicia was instrumental in developing this seal, and she'll be going into more detail momentarily. And then alongside Alicia, we have our very own Elizabeth Kuhn, who is the co-executive director at Collective Leadership Institute, and she's based in Germany. She's going to focus on fostering, no, I'm sorry, that's incorrect there. It's not the right title. She's looking, apologies, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is going to be looking at the continuum from dominance to cooperation in the work that we do. Here it is, on the continuum from dominance to collaboration, a partnership index for observing global trends. Now, we're very excited to be launching today CLI's Partnership Index, and that's precisely what Elizabeth is going to be talking about. This is meant to complement Alicia's focus on educational settings, specifically in schools, with a broader focus in the Partnership Index on countries and global trends that we're seeing in terms of the extent to which countries are modeling partnership approaches in their work. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment because I do want to see who's in the room, and also for Alicia and Elizabeth to also understand who's with us. Catherine and I have prepared a very brief survey that Catherine would activate in just a moment. And this is an anonymous survey, but it will ask you your region, which sector you're working in, your gender, and even your age, at least your age bracket, so that we can see who's with us. Catherine, could you please go ahead and open up that survey? Okay, so there should be a pop-up box on your screen, and you can navigate through question 1, which region do you call home? You can go ahead and answer each of those. We'll leave that up for just a moment or two. I can see already, yes, the responses are coming in. And I notice we're at 57 participants. That's great. Thank you for being here with us today. Okay, I think the responses are slowing down just a little bit. We already have 40 people have responded. That's great. So people are not only here, but they're active. That's very welcome. All right, let's go for 10 more seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, Catherine, let's please close that survey, and if we could share the results with the group, that would be great. Catherine, is this visible, this box? We can, okay, excellent. All right. So let's just scroll through and notice who's in the room. Also, Alicia and Elizabeth, for you to take this in terms of your audience. We have very strong representation from Africa and Europe in particular, with Europe making up about 51% of participants, and from Africa, we have about 42%. Thank you for being here and calling in. We do have some of you, a couple in Asia who are staying up a bit later, and at least 2 people in North America and in South America, maybe, who are getting up very early. Thank you for that. If we scroll down in terms of different sectors where you're active, it looks like civil society is very strongly represented, as well as academia and education. Alicia, perhaps something to note for yourself. We have a couple of media professionals and about 7 people in private sector and 7 people in public sector. Thank you for being here. Wow, look at this. It looks like we have nearly 75% of our participants are women, and we have about 25% are men. Thank you for being here with us. Excellent. And indeed, 100% of our speakers are female today. Finally, it looks like we're mostly between 36 and 50 years of age, but also this younger bracket of 21 to 35 is very well represented, and 51 to 65. It looks like we need to do more outreach to our very young youth, as well as to our elders. Let's think about that. All right, thank you. That's who we have in the room. I think, Catherine, if you could please save those results, that would be excellent. One last question. We're going to do this last question in the text chat so that we can all see the responses as they come in. Catherine, if you would kindly paste in our final sort of welcome survey question is, what is one reason you came to today's session? Just one reason, please, that you came to today's session. This might guide Alicia and Elizabeth and myself in how we deliver the session. So please, one brief response in the text chat. Okay, here come the responses. Now it's my turn to keep up with you. Excellent. You can see their transformation and learning, working in a similar field and curious how you go about things, inspiration from our speakers, to SDG 8 is being mentioned. Wow, okay, I can't keep up. Connecting, learning, redefining success. Thank you. Curiosity, getting inspired. Okay, people working in a similar field. Very good. Thanks very kindly for sharing. I noticed the Sustainable Development Goals are being mentioned a couple of times. Networking, learning, inspiration are coming up quite a bit. Excellent. Okay, now I'm going to, in a moment, invite Alicia to make her presentation. We do have a feature, a Q&A feature. My idea is that Alicia would present and then Elizabeth would present immediately after her. And then together we'll enter into an extended time for conversations and questions. Our speakers will ask questions of one another. You can please put your questions in the Q&A. You can also upvote, meaning you can vote for others' questions that you find interesting. Maybe Catherine, you could add our guidance into the text chat there. That would be great. And then I'll be looking to the upvoted questions from you. And we'll likely have time for those of you who wish to just speak with your microphone to do that as well. Okay. Alicia, I understand you'd like to share your slides. If you could kindly take about 10 minutes. Welcome. It's great to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Sharing now. Hope you're able to see it. Yes.
Great.
So it's a pleasure for me to be here and contribute to this panel's question, bring in the experience we've had at Air Charter International with the Air Charter and ESD School Seal. I'm going to put my timer as well so I don't lose track of time. So for many years, we've had at Air Charter International these questions because we've been using the Air Charter as an education tool. The Air Charter is this declaration of ethical principles and values for sustainability. It can be used in many areas for global governance as a soft law instrument for different things. But in education, we thought that it was important as well to focus, and especially in this aim of trying to find the transformation of our worldviews, of people's worldviews, to change the way you think so you can change the way you act, and we can just lead to this transition for a sustainable, peaceful, and just world. But so we were wondering if these education processes with the Air Charter were having this impact on people's worldviews, and if it was possible to measure if these are leading to cultural and behavioral shifts. So these are big questions, and let me tell you, we don't have answers to this yet, but we're trying. So we're using different ways. So for example, testimonies of people who take our courses. We also with case studies, etc. But I took this and I took advantage of my work for my PhD, and I said, would it be possible to develop assessment framework that we could work with schools? This is start with primary and secondary schools, eventually move into other education institutions, but maybe we could try to use your charter as an assessment framework, and also respond to some education institutions that were seeking recognition of their work using their charter. So that's why I started the process, and then it has continued with the support of other people. And it was good to have previous experiences. So I know Dominic was here. He knows very well this. Continues to be an instrument that we used before, the EarthChart ECSS is called, and it's very good. Actually, Dominic participated in creating that one long time ago. And then we also participated as ECI in a project with several universities, leading with Brighton University in the UK. And it was a project that was called We Value. And it was about creating as well metrics. It was creating assessment frameworks for values-based education processes. So there was some background, some previous experience, but what we thought was we needed a framework that was more contextualized to the education institutions, and that it was through the Earth Charter values and principles. So that's why bringing these ideas, start creating the Earth Charter and ESD school seal, which is an instrument. So it tries to measure if education processes are having an impact on a transformation of people's worldview. It can also measure whether the conditions for transformation and change are incorporated into a school environment, because it is very difficult to measure if the people's transformation, but what you can do is to see if the conditions for this transformation are present in the school environment. It also helps to evaluate how much a school is incorporating values and principles of sustainability with a whole institution approach. So you'll see later how this quality seal has been created, organized in the whole institution approach areas. And whether the school educational processes are committed to making sustainability practice central using the Earth Charter. So this is like the instrument, the objectives of the instrument, but we see it more as a learning tool. So it's like you assess to learn about your practice. As you will be able to see, the seal follows like a self-assessment process, and it triggers that many conversations, dialogue to be able to reflect on the sustainability practice and find ways to improve. So when we're trying to think like why any school should go through a process of trying to use this tool, so we think that it could be interesting for the school to learn how the institution can be more aligned with the values and principles of sustainability and these new paradigms of education of UNESCO. I know many of you mentioned the SDGs, so we are using SDG 4, which is on education, especially target 4.7, which talks about education for sustainable development, and to identify and communicate what is doing well, what the institution is doing well, and align with the vision of sustainability, but also to find blind spots, improve, and to stand out, because what we try to do is that these schools that are doing all these things, sometimes in isolation, we can make them more public and connected with other like-minded schools. So the essence of this seal, of the certification, right, is your charter, and it's in the pillar 1 of your charter, which is respect, with respect meaning this recognition of our interdependence. Sorry, it says independence, and it didn't correct it, is interdependence. And care, which is the guiding value for our role as human beings here on this earth, maybe the universe, let's say. And so when we recognize our interdependence and we work or we behave as human beings with care, we can see that we could have more democratic human societies that are more just, participatory, sustainable, and peaceful. So this is what pillar 1 of their charter it says. And so this is the essence of the seal. So in my research, what I did was to distill from their charter text some core values, concepts, and action principles that are at the core of the seal. So there's all this, what you can see in this list. and then find criteria for each of them. So where did the criteria is expression. So we're thinking about, let's say, respect. How does respect expresses? How can we see it expresses according to their charter? So the criteria, I found it in in their charter text. Then so it's like the values and then the criteria, the expression of those values in the text. But considering that this was also a seal that is focused on education institutions, especially on primary and secondary schools. So then the criteria also considers some pedagogical elements. So it will be, I don't have time to go into what are the pedagogical from the elements, but they were introduced. So it was like criteria coming from their charter text and criteria coming from the biopedagogical approach to learning and some pedagogical principles as well that comes from my colleague Miriam Vilela. And that's the mixing all those, starting creating indicators. But one important aspect when creating the indicators, it was to try to make it as complex as possible. So in that sense, what we used was this integral framework, Ken Wilber's integral framework. I don't know, maybe you are familiar with this, but so he proposed if you want to analyze or think about anything in a situation, etc., you can analyze it from all these dimensions. So there's individual dimensions and interior. So the individual interior is the I dimension, what I experience. Then the individual exterior is what you can see from my behavior, what I do. Then the collective interior is the culture, is our values, like our shared meanings, etc., as what we share collective. And the collective exterior is what we can see from those values and the systems, what we do. And they are all interrelated and or collect. So for creating the indicators for this, I use indicators for each. So each criteria has indicators in all these dimensions. And then, so the seal is created with it has two type of instruments. For the dimension 1 and 2 that you mentioned before, we created a questionnaire for students. So it's just to reflect more on the internal aspects. And then for dimensions 2 and 3, is this list of indicators like a self-assessment framework, which is organized under the whole institution approach areas. I can show them here in a more nice way. So this is something that UNESCO has been promoting. So it's the pedagogy and curriculum, then institutional policy, governance, and student life, and then aspects related to infrastructure and physical space, environmental management, and then events and interaction with nearby community. So there are indicators divided into this. So maybe I won't go through this. So there's this way to getting started, how a school starts. So creates a committee and go through all the whole process. And then these are the levels. So this is very simple. It's just 3 levels that schools can achieve: the beginner, the intermediate, or the champion level. And so we are, as I mentioned to you, in pilot cases. So actually there's some schools, one and there are 2 schools in Germany that are trying the work, but also in Costa Rica, in Mexico, Puerto Rico. There's one in the US that just finished. So it was very interesting because they were doing quite advanced work. So we are learning from them, and I guess my time is over. But one of the interesting things is that every time the school goes through the process, we learn more about this seal process, what can happen. And so in one school there was this, there's one in the UK, sorry, I didn't mention. They did already curriculum reforms in the school while doing the seal. So some of them, another one, especially this one in the UK, they understood what was sustainability in a more integral way because they were saying it was more the environmental management, but they saw the complexity of it and they really appreciated that. So I will be happy to share more about what we're learning about this. We still have many, how to say, things to learn and challenges to move with this field, but so far it's been a very exciting experience. Sorry, I'll stop sharing now. Thank you.
Alicia, thank you so much for having shared. That was very coherent, especially for 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is there. Indeed, the Earth Charter seems like a very strong underpinning for a tool, a metric like this, and thanks for the efforts you put into it. We will go for Elizabeth's presentation and then come back to discuss them both. I see that we've had at least a couple of questions coming in, and we can take those up during the discussion time, or Alicia, if you see something in the Q&A that you can answer directly, also feel free. So don't forget, please use the Q&A. And I would like to get Elizabeth's title right here. Elizabeth, I quickly updated the slide here with the correct title. Elizabeth is going to talk about the partnership index that she and especially Martin Fielkow developed from within CLI on the continuum from dominance to collaboration, a partnership index for observing global trends. So we're working at 2 different levels here. Elizabeth, it's really nice to have you presenting on the partnership index. The floor is yours, and feel free to share your slides.
Okay, thank you very much, Dominic. I'll share my slides and at the same time maybe say a note for those who have been at the conference last year. We briefly mentioned that we're developing this partnership index. And so the concept was there last year, but Martin and myself, we developed it with data also over the course of the last year. And now I'm happy to share the results of that process. And so now I finally found my sharing button. And hopefully you all can see my slides here. Regarding this partnership index. So as mentioned, this was briefly announced last year, but fully fleshed out and really put some of the data behind it during the last year. And the reason why we did this is that we say it is part of our mission to really contribute to partnership orientation worldwide. And that goes beyond, let's say, multi-stakeholder partnerships for development projects or for sustainability projects at large, but really say it is an orientation also in societies and in countries worldwide that we just also need to pay attention to, in particular in these times of a lot of global upheaval and developments that can be quite worrying at the moment. And we thought it is very important to really look at where we are going, where are these trends of societies and governments, and in particular when we might be from the news cycle, see a lot of negative trends, it is important to also focus our sight on where are the small success stories that maybe do not get reported, from where we can also learn from globally, and that might be important to shine and highlight too. And so this partnership index, it is mirrored on the transformation enablers. So the compass lens that Dominic just presented right at the beginning, at the introduction of the session. And so takes our largest lens essentially to look at aliveness patterns and to look at partnership patterns. And this comes from the conviction and saying partnership orientation in a society, in a country, is key to also advance sustainability, to advance ideas and concrete contributions for the regeneration and the regenerative futures that we need. And one thing I want to say right away on this index, it is decidedly not about evaluating countries on yet another scale. So we don't believe in naming and shaming as an approach to change anywhere in the world. It is really more, as Dominic mentioned in the beginning, a metric of hopefully highlighting interesting insights that help us all as a collective, as a community, to change and to get inspiration for change and for progress. So it's not about controlling, it's not about judging at all. It is really more about looking at data that we can find in a different way and help us all to shift our perspective. So with that said, let me get a bit more into detail about how we compiled this index. First of all, it is a meta index, which means it's an index that collects other indices that are out there. It's not us as CLI ourselves who researches the data, but we have done extensive research on what kind of already existing indices and data collections are actually out there that match the aspects, the nature, the spirit behind the transformation enablers. And so globally, what we found are a total of 21 different indices that kind of match, that we find are an interesting and invaluable contribution to the transformation enablers, and that can help us really look at where are different countries in the world going. Now, the criteria for selecting those indices was to say it should, of course, cover the majority of countries that we have in the world. So it doesn't really help us if we have a great or really interesting index that only covers a small region of our world, of our planet, and leaves out others. And of course, those that we also say have a relatively transparent and, let's say, scientifically acceptable way of also collecting their data and sharing it. So this is the very interesting and I think very diverse mix also of indices that we have collected for all of the enablers. And I think one thing that really stood out when we started compiling the data here and looking at what all the different indices are saying, we have, for example, for innovation, we found out, interestingly, there are a lot of indices out there. So there's a global innovation index. There's an institute that tracks how many patents are registered every year, how many Nobel Prize winners are there, of course, but also larger things like the gross domestic spending on research and development. So this was quite interesting. We had lots of indices for this enabler. At the same time, we found good indices for multi-level governance, so the democracy index, and a very interesting one that looks at what are citizens' expectations in a country that, for example, any public consultation process would actually influence policies. That was a nice little find. At the same time, though the indices are interesting, these were the ones that we looked at that had the least data actually across the globe. So for some countries there was data, but for some there wasn't. It was still enough to make the place in our partnership index, but that was also very interesting. That seems to be the thing that does not get measured a lot globally. So this was one of our first insights, just compiling the different indices that go into the partnership index as such. What we then did is putting all the indices together and weighting them. For those who have a bit of knowledge of statistics out there, you might know what kind of work that all involved. What we came up with at the end was a category or a certain scale along which we had different categories. And that would range from more dominance-oriented societies and countries towards like strong and clear partnership countries. And as always, it's not so much the extreme points that are really interesting, but more the varied elements in between. And this is also, we'll see that in a moment, the data also showed we're very rarely like a full partnership society, nor are we a full dominance society, but the most countries are somewhere in between. And that also ties in with a lot of research that is done, that even though there might be a lot of tendencies towards more dominance-oriented societies or tendencies in cultures, more hierarchy, maybe also more direct control decision-making processes, there's always a bit of a partnership element that is there. Sometimes it is hidden, but it is there. And so what we have is more categories around partnership-oriented overall. Then we have a group where we say it's maybe undecided. The pattern is not super clear, but it's on average, it's more leaning towards partnership principles. Then the same level of undecided, but more leaning towards dominance. And then, of course, also more generally dominance-oriented societies and countries. And so overall, what we found is from 198 countries, we had enough data from all of these indices and for these categories for 136. And if we look at the world map with these colors of categories, this is what we ended up with. And as I mentioned, there's nothing at the ends of the spectrum, no like full partnership society, no full dominance country that we could find, but the majority is really in the middle somewhere. We do have some with not enough data. Unfortunately, sadly, it is a lot of the countries where a lot of the people in the world live, but we hope that also changes over time and we get a clearer picture of the world. Now, we have partnership-oriented countries are 16 of the 136 countries with enough data. Of those, most of them are in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, also in North America, but also Japan and South Korea. On that, I should maybe note that the data that goes in here is, of course, collected. If it was collected last year, that was already very new, but it was mostly, I think, collected in 2023. So let's say newest developments might not be yet displayed here, and that might actually be interesting to look at how this changes, let's say, next year or over the next 2 years. With that said, we have the group of countries that is the largest group overall. It is the dominance-oriented countries so far. It's 61. And the second group of that is undecided, but leaning towards dominance. I think for now, this is the pattern that emerges in general, overall countries across the transformation enablers, the 6 that we have. I'm looking at the time, that I'm not running away with my time. I want to show a couple of highlights because this might, to some of you, maybe not be so super surprising, but as always, the interesting stuff is in the details. As I said, this is the overall pattern that comes up across countries. But the interesting things is if we look into details of the transformation enablers of every country. And so I just want to highlight a couple of things that are, let's say, maybe not surprising, but I think really interesting to look a bit deeper at for our learning also. And that is, first of all, Slovakia, for example, is absolutely top regarding social equity and empowerment. That's the Gini coefficient index, if that tells you anything. And that we found really interesting to highlight. That's something we can definitely learn from Slovakia, how to achieve that. We also had regarding structures, we had both France and Turkey being absolute top regarding transformation networks, because these are the countries with the highest number of international memberships, like in associations and institutions, in research collaborations, anything. So these two really show us regarding global connections, how it's done. We have regarding innovation, we have South Korea is by far the very best in innovative spaces. This is measured by the number of patents. So they are absolutely top here. And regarding metrics, one of our themes today, Brazil is actually in the top 4 regarding feedback systems. So the civil society participation index, maybe also not something you would necessarily think of as the top flyers regarding the political developments in the last years. But that is very strong there. And regarding governance, we actually have, again, regarding stakeholder consultation, South Korea really coming up on top. So their citizens' expectations that any public consultation would influence policies is absolutely highest as anywhere in the world. So there's a lot of confidence when citizens are consultants that this really goes into policies and into policy making in the country. And the very last one has quite a couple of them. And this is, the voluntary agreements under guiding regulations. And this is actually measured by the national reports on SDG contributions. And we have here Azerbaijan, Togo, Colombia, Mexico, and also Uruguay are those countries that report most on what they have actually advanced regarding SDG implementation. So these are really the ones driving SDG implementation through reporting, through showing how they are performing with their indicators, whether with success or with struggles. And so with that, I just want to pause it here because I really just wanted to show some highlights on the details that are hidden in this index. What I can say as next steps and also where this goes, of course, this is only a very brief introduction. We will share all of the data that is part of this index on our website, and we will update it also every 2 years. Now, if you know of an index that we haven't found or that is really new that you think fits into a transformation enabler, please send it to us. Our kind of the requirements are really that we say it should be there data for at least half of the countries in the world, and it should be collected regularly so that we can keep it in there. And so this should be, or we want this really to be a contribution to a transformative metric in the sense that this is also open for contributions and for insights for research that all of us in the community find on indices that are worthwhile to integrate here and that can help us navigate and help us also learn from national developments that we see here. I leave it here and stop my sharing and give it back to Dominic.
Thanks very much to both of you, Elizabeth and Alicia, for these rather complementary presentations. I appreciate the depth and the breadth that we saw, although both presentations had a world map. So I think the scope is similar in terms of what we're working for regarding sustainability on this planet that we call home. So there are resources in the text chat to learn more about the Earth Charter and ESD seal, as well as to learn more about the Partnership Index. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. If you haven't asked your question yet, feel free to do so. There's a third one. But I'd like to keep this conversational. So Alicia and Elizabeth, I can bring in the questions from the Q&A momentarily, but I'd like to give you also the chance to engage with one another. Was there something that came up for you that you noticed, a comment or a question while you were listening to the other person's presentation? I'd like to open the floor first to the two of you to ask a question. Elizabeth, you have your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. And thank you also from my side, Alicia, for the presentation. Can I say on a personal note, I come at least partly from a family of very dedicated educators. It's been really great to share the online panel, so to say, with you. So thank you for that. And I have a ton of questions, but if I have to choose one, I would like to know from the schools with whom you have done the accreditation process already, what did they report back on the changes that this process and the accreditation itself made for them? So be it with students or parents or the community, what, if you had at all the chance to catch up with them afterwards, how did that impact them and their wider stakeholder system, so to say?
Yes. So what we do, like with this, when the schools go through the process and they want to go through having the seal, yeah, like the certification. So a verifier is the one that is someone else from us, is an Earth Charter educator. They do a report. And then many times we're trying to as well write a case study or a story with them. We won't be able to do that with every, but at least with several of them. And what they're reporting is that, for example, there was this school that they've been using, for example, their charter, and they are also an eco school, and they have many of those recognitions, etc. But they, for example, what they told us, and one change that happens is that this aspect related to a culture of peace, or these aspects related to practice more democratic processes inside the school, we're not there. They didn't connect these aspects related to, for example, peace with sustainability. The focus was not a lot on environmental management. So it was quite wide opening, and then they started to make changes in the classes. And some of the teachers were in the process doing the collecting information and part of this committee. They were already making changes, because there were some, I remember there was one of the geography and history, and another one from math, and they were like, how they didn't connect that sustainability issues could be incorporated in the classes. So they're reporting those type of things. And I think that's one common trend that we see, is that it helps to have a more complex view of what sustainability is. And we often see that still sustainability is considered more on the environmental aspects, but this social injustice, like you were talking about the Gini index, this aspect related to social inequality is not considered in many aspects. So it was, I think, important to bring this complexity. So I think that's one of the reasons. I'll share in the, I forgot, but I'll share here one of the case studies that we have, so you can maybe read what they reported this school. I'll find the link and I'll send here in the chat.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, really, I think it's very heartening to see that it really had that impact of, I know you mentioned it as an example, but like a math teacher's awareness of what is my contribution to sustainability and also sustainability education. I think breaking it down to your very own, your workspace, your life, the little difference that we make as individual human beings, that is a great contribution. That's very heartening to hear.
Wonderful. Yes. Maybe should I take now the moment, Dominic, do you think?
Let's actually, Alicia, let's stay with your topic for a moment,
Okay.
just so we can also integrate a couple of the participant questions. And then I think we could switch over to Elizabeth in a moment. So there's a question from Oigoga Onu. I hope I'm pronouncing that all right. For you, Alicia, regarding, was the local context for each of the pilot schools or communities analyzed before this assessment tool was applied? Or was it their choice? Did they come forward? And follow up to that from the same person, can African schools participate in applying this tool?
Yes, so because this seal is applicable to any school in the globe, actually any African school can participate. The specificities of each country or the schools in each country were not considered as such, because that would have been quite complicated. So it is what the indicators do is to be contextualized to what schools do, in a broader sense, is primary and secondary schools, which is quite, there are so many commonalities there. So that's the difference. But yeah, no. But what has happened, and is quite flexible, is, for example, there's this school now in Germany which are doing, so we had to translate everything. So when we do translation, there's some contextualization that happens because the words are not, right now we have in English, Spanish, in Portuguese, and in German, this tool. And this school, they already started, they were telling us, these questions we might change a little bit because our students, and we say, go ahead, yeah, you can contextualize, change, for example, some of the questions in the questionnaire and some of the understanding. So when the school is doing it, there's some contextualization happening there. So there's flexibility, because sometimes it's a matter of words, it's a matter of changing the meaning, but the core, the values and the core pedagogical foundations are the same, but sometimes you need to communicate in a different way, and that the tool allows to change words, etc. So that's happening, and it will be wonderful to do. One of the things is that the seal, to be able to make it operational, it has a fee to be able, because we need to hire a verifier, etc. So that has probably hindered some of the schools to be able to apply. But whenever we've been able to find the sponsor and the possibility or a verifier that is not charging, so we can make it with no cost for the school. But so we are in that process. That's something that it is a challenge, because it has a cost of time actually for so many of the people. But of course, it will be wonderful to do it with many African schools, and we hope we can do. And hopefully, yeah, you can share my contact information. I'll be happy to be in touch.
Great. Alicia, thank you. And for all of the educators on the call wanting to learn more, there's definitely, the link is in the text chat. I think there is an email address listed there. Alicia, I think you're starting to answer one of the other questions that's here. There's a question about the fact that changing worldviews, as you mentioned, changing behavior, this is coming from Esther, is challenging and takes time and might be the result of different factors. So you talked about the tool being adaptable to different contexts as part of that. So the question was, how do you deal with those different factors? If I could just add to that question, the focus on primary and secondary education in relationship to changing worldviews, changing behavior, why the focus on young children, on youth? It sounds like you've specifically focused there instead of university level or professionals. Why young people in terms of changing worldviews, changing behavior?
Yeah, we started with the schools because the school environment, as comparison to universities, that one university can be a city almost. So it's not that we are ruling that out. We are actually hoping to be able to gather the experience, the expertise, saying, to see how we can bring this to higher education, and also to, for example, the private sector, for example, a certification like that. But that requires even more level of specificity. Imagine the amount of companies that are there, and so we need to learn more and about that. But with primary and secondary schools, first, they are instrumental in this, in fostering the values and principles in young people to be able to bring this changing worldview. So they are quite instrumental. So we think this is very important. Is the focus of in the governments. For example, here in Costa Rica, like the Ministry of Education is always on the spot to see what is of interest of everybody. But also in terms of applying a seal, the size is more manageable in the sense than sometimes a university that has their cities, sometimes thousands and thousands. So it's just a matter of learning better what could work. But we also think they're instrumental in the sense of it's this young age when you are really trying to come up with your core values. They say until the age of 7, you really is the moment when the core of you, of your values and how you understand the world is formed. So it is a critical aspect. And I think if young people start to educate with this complex worldview, with sustainability values as well, introduce, we think it would be important for the future of humanity, hopefully. So yeah, so it's.
Thank you. Excellent. Alicia, I wonder if we could now also shift toward Elizabeth. Did you have a comment or a question on the partnership index for her?
Yes, no, I really enjoy, I really like to see this thing, because actually we were thinking at some point of developing an index with using their charter text. So you were using this partnership, but it was so complicated. So I'm glad that you were able to do it and be able to find this index. So I'm familiar with this, how you find index, and then you have to be quite good with statistics and math. And one thing I like what you were saying is that you're not trying to evaluate each country and put it, like you mentioned, to not put shame on a country that is on the bottom. And I think it's very clever from you, because you're highlighting who's doing things in a good way, and that actually motivates them. Oh, maybe in the next one I'll be. So that's something good. But one of the things, and considering one of the challenges that we had, is like, how do you communicate, for example, what is a partnership? So for example, you showed this partnership indexed, but does this partnership means that there's a lot of collaboration inside the country, so many institutions work inside, or is it a country, if it's a country that does a lot of collaboration with other countries, despite the fact that they could be doing collaboration to good ways or not good ways. I'm thinking because sometimes you see some countries are collaborating with each other, but maybe in ways that we don't for means that we are not considering good, sort of thing. Like, I don't know if you understand, if I'm getting understand. But yeah, it's just to communicate what this partnership means.
Thank you for your question, Alicia. I would also just link it, Elizabeth, to at least two of the questions in the chat. Alicia, what is a partnership? What is it that what are we able to see through these different global indices in terms of collaboration within or between countries? There were two other individuals who asked, I think, a related question, Sebastian Wolf and Katharina Bieli, on what looks like a bit of a global north, global south divide in the map at present. So how do we perceive partnership with the current indices that exist? What are we able to really, what are we able to see? Are we measuring the right things? Are some of the questions also from our participants. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Dominic, for orienting me also through the Q&A. Yeah, let me maybe start, Alicia, with your pertinent question on the collaboration. So we did try, or how we understand partnership is truly collaboration between diverse parts in a society. That can be different sectors, that can be, most importantly, administration, citizen, private sector, academia, but also collaboration on an international level. However, we have sadly so far not found yet an index that really measures what you rightly hinted at, sort of good partnerships on an international level, like inter-country collaborations, where we say it also opens the box a little bit. How does that collaboration look like? So is it a partnership in, I would say, the sense we've applied here? Like there's a joint goal, countries meet on an eye level, there is an effort to also balance out inequities of power that exist between the countries. We haven't found that yet. We want to include it, but we haven't found it yet. The part of inside and like within a country, between countries, that is in there, but the aspect of the quality of, let's say, multi-country collaboration is not yet in there. So small side note, if anyone knows an index that measures this, please let us know. And we put it in there. And that brings me to the questions from Sebastian and Katharina, and I think also one other person that I've seen in the chat. We do absolutely recognize that there is a divide between the data that we see from global north and global south countries. And I think someone put it quite adroitly in the chat also that, well, data gathering in itself and data presence can also be an element of dominance. Now, the way that we want to handle this is, first of all, as part of the index, also say, being able to contribute data to all these indices that are in the index is also a form of privilege. If your country is undergoing a war, a military conflict, or just has very limited resources and is trying to utmost best to help its citizens and help its community survive, then there is very little time to invest in things like, let's say, patents for innovative development and getting patents recognized. And so we completely acknowledge that this is part of it, and part of this index maps that inequity also in data availability, in the privilege in actually contributing data to global researches such as this index. And what we want to do with that recognition is also highlight and say, if as a planet, as a collective humanity that we are organized in different countries and societies, if we want to learn from each other and contribute something that is so global, then this also needs attention. This needs support from those countries that can, to those countries that are overwhelmed at the moment, to also contribute to these elements and to learn from each other and to hopefully grow in certain aspects and shift away from a lot of times focus of resources to basic necessities. That is part of what we want to focus on also in the iterations of the index, because of course this is like the Earth Charter seal. It is supposed to be an index that grows with every iteration, and from every iteration we also want to learn. So in the next iteration, we also want to show what countries were able to contribute a bit more data, what new indices we have found that are maybe more appropriate than the ones that we have here. So this is let's say, a collective learning effort that we want to undergo with anyone and everyone who is interested, and something that we certainly want to sharpen quality and quantity-wise going forward.
Nice. Thank you. I appreciate that both of you are talking about very openly about using these tools also in a dynamic way, that they're evolving or they're adaptable to specific contexts. I think, Elizabeth, we just have a suggestion now for a further index that might be interesting. And Alicia is also sharing a specific case there from the United Kingdom of a school that has the Earth Charter and ESD seal. I wonder if I could end with your brief comments on one last question, because in a way you both mentioned story. Yes, both of these assessment tools are in the early days, and content data continues to be collected over time. But I wonder about sharing stories of success. So literally, Alicia, what you mentioned with schools sharing stories of success to inspire other schools to perhaps get involved. And also, Elizabeth, on your side, stories of success, like you were sharing, highlighting certain countries who are doing quite well in certain areas. To link this to the following session, what role could story play in relationship to your metrics?
Yeah, I shared one. I think that one, which is there in the chat, is a success as well. This is a school that is been doing wonderful work, and yet they found additional complexity in what they're doing. But there's another one that we don't have the information yet. We just finished the certification process, and it's actually in the US, and I am quite interested and I was quite inspired to see a school. What they were telling us is that they've been quite, how to say, not connected with an international audience or an international institutions. They've been quite local, and they're, I think, in New Jersey, in a place like that. It's called Ridge and Valley School. And but they're doing so many interesting things. And when I see about sustainability, they do so much. That is, they even have the kids grow the food that they eat at the cafeteria, but they also do different activities and dynamics that bring the notions of the cosmovision of indigenous groups there in the, so they're doing so many interesting things that I find that, you know, there's a lot of things that are silent that we don't know, but are growing the best of us as humans there. So that gives me a lot of hope, because sometimes the bad and sometimes the evil things are very loud, but we need to remember that many of the there's many good things happening in this world, but sometimes it's quite silent. But that gives me a lot of hope. But yeah, so I hope we'll capture that story as well from this school. And their interest was to be connected with more international schools because they wanted to be learned from other contexts. So I think that's one thing we'll try to do with this process.
Nice. Alicia, thank you for shining light on those good things that are happening in different places, in different schools around the world. I think a lot of us need those kinds of stories, and it's partly why I'm asking this question. Elizabeth, what do you think about relating stories, success stories, to this partnership index?
Yeah, I want to, if I may, Alicia, actually borrow a bit your words regarding things, making visible things that are silent or that are not so visible all the time. And I think that is something that we hope also that the index contributes to over time. I think, as many of you also shared in the Q&A question, this is flawed regarding data collection. Who gets to decide what kind of data gets measured and where finances flow with all of that? Yes, this is imperfect, and yet with imperfect data, you find hidden gems of success stories. You find hidden gems of advances, of ingenuity that blossom in places where you don't usually look, or that don't usually get reported, or don't get the attention also in information and in news cycles. And for us, I think, or for me at least, I can speak very personally, discovering these gems and spotlighting them, that is a big connection that I see with narratives, because I think behind every, that sounds a bit banal, but behind every success story, there is an inspiring narrative. You need to have a vision or hope or a faith in something that you drive and that develops things for the better, that is there, that can, and I think that needs to be unearthed, because yes, we need them more, but in general, we also just need them for our joint learning.
Yes. Thank you both. Let's give Elizabeth and Alicia a big round of applause for being here with us today and for sharing their stories around metrics. Here come applause and some hearts. We stay right there for a moment because we just have a couple of questions we'd like to ask in the text chat. My colleague Katrin will add them there. The first one is simply, what's one insight that you've had today? It's there in the text chat. Go ahead and offer any responses there to that first question. Just one insight, and let's see, you can see what others are saying as well. People are reflecting for a moment. Alicia and Elizabeth, you're also welcome to participate. One insight you might have had today. All right, here we go. Some responses are coming in. One on humility, in terms of what and how we measure. Learn by doing. Luciana, measuring what matters is a complex endeavor, but worth the effort. Elizabeth says the power of metrics to spark connection to the SDGs in unlikely places. We have define and measure and define, then reflect. This is also fundamentally about feedback loops that we need to continue learning our way into the future. Thank you. Excellent. Katrin, let's go for the second question, which is, what is one open question that you still may have on this topic of metrics? One possible open question. There it is in the text chat. From the last question, we still have some coming in. Thank you for those. We'll document your responses afterwards. I think still from the last question on insights that partnerships are crucial, as it was added. Ways to drive collective impact with sustainable development implementation. Thank you. I think we're still getting some insights about metrics for agency, helping us focus on what's important, measuring what matters on the ground. And still, people are still coming with their insights. It's all insights, no more questions. I think you've answered them all, Alicia and Elizabeth. Alicia's work is inspiring and also reminding us that this type of work requires concerted efforts. No, it's moving too fast. Here come some questions. How to balance the effort put in measuring vis-a-vis the effort in doing the work. Okay. Here's a question. How do you differentiate change that is primarily an individual experience and transformation that is when these experiences all add up together as part of a system? I think of Alicia, your Ken Wilber slide, perhaps the individual and the collective. And transformation can occur on multiple levels and multiple places. How can we control for corruption in the sustainability movement through assessment data? Yes, that's hard to guard against, but must be done. Thank you. And let's go for our last question, Katrin, if you would kindly. We're wrapping up the first of 2 sessions today. What's one word that describes how you're feeling at the end of this session? Just to wrap things up and bring this first session to a close. One word, how you're feeling. Got puzzled and curious and empowered. Got inspired, reflective. Thank you. A further question to think about. How can we ground truth in data? What people recognize locally as being valid? Yeah. Further feelings: interested, deeply inspired, thankful for all the ideas, happy and inspired. Okay, nice. All right, so again, thanks Alicia and Elizabeth. It was a real pleasure to be in conversation with both of you today.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Bye.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Dominic.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth.